Hey friends, if you're listening on Thursday, April 11th, and you're a paid subscriber, you're invited to hang out with us tonight. Look for the email with the link to the Zoom, and I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. Now let's do a show.
Stand up.
Hello and welcome back. Joining me today, Tim Wise. Always awesome. You will love our conversation. I promise you that. It starts at about 7 minutes because I got no audio clips today. And thank you very much for being here. Sorry I wasn't here with you yesterday. All hell broke loose, I tell you. Got a flat tire. My parents came into town to watch my daughter Julia's lacrosse game where she scored 2 goals, and we went out to dinner, and there was just no time for me to get my work done. I decided always to put family first because that is the values here at the stand-up community. I know you support it, but I hate not being here for you and surprising you that I'm not here, but I am today, and I've got a great show for you. So let's get to the news, shall we? Lots to talk about. As always, in the last 24 hours, the news from Earth One coming at you, where man walked on the moon, the Electoral College distorts democracy, and I am actually bald. Yes, it's true. All right, let's start in Arizona, where just a day after the Arizona Supreme Court, they seem nice, revived in 1864. You know, during the Civil War, right before it ended, an 1864 law that bans nearly all abortions in the state. Democrats in the legislature proposed bills this morning to immediately repeal it yesterday morning. Some Republicans, including Donald Trump, agreed, well, I think that goes a little too far, 1864. But state Republicans thwarted the repeal effort. In the state Senate, Republican leaders removed one of the bills from the day's agenda. In the House, Republican leaders quickly put the House into recess before any vote could be held. Oh, fascinating what's happening there in Arizona. I'll definitely get somebody on to talk about this issue. It's been way too long since I talked specifically with reproduction rights experts and activists. Bad news on inflation. It's remained higher than expected. A closely watched measure of inflation was reported yesterday at a level slightly higher than economists were expecting. The report particularly worrying for the Fed officials who have become concerned that their progress in lowering inflation might be stalling. Inflation remained elevated once again in March, adding another round of price increases to Americans' already strained wallets. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that 12-month price growth accelerated from 3.2 in February to 3.5% in March. So there you have that economic news. Not great. Also, yesterday, the President of the United States met with the leader of Japan, Fumio Kishida, at the White House for a pomp-filled state visit. The two leaders announced plans for greater coordination and integration between our militaries, which President Biden described as the most significant upgrade of our alliance since it was established. Then last night, there's an official state dinner in honor of the Japanese Prime Minister, which is something reserved only for America's closest allies, apparently featuring a performance by Paul Simon. So that's important, interesting news, and one of yesterday's top stories. Here's some good news from our government that is there to protect us, and they often do, but nobody talks about it. The Environmental Protection Agency, I will talk about it, announced today that yesterday the U.S. for the first time would require municipal water systems to remove 6 synthetic chemicals known collectively as PFAS. The chemicals, which have been linked to cancer and other health problems, are present in the tap water of hundreds of millions of Americans. I'm actually set to talk to Jon Carroll this week. I'll ask him if that was necessary. The EPA set new near zero limits on the chemicals, which are found in dental floss, firefighting foams, and children's toys. Good to know. They're sometimes referred to as forever chemicals because they never fully degrade and can accumulate in the body and the environment. I think I'm probably filled with forever chemicals. You might be too. Sorry, no offense. You look like you are filled with forever chemicals. You know who I'm talking to. Garrett Sever. Okay, what else can I tell you? The disgraced former president's longtime financial lieutenant, Alan Weisselberg, was sentenced to 5 months in the Rikers Island jail for perjury, pleading guilty to 2 counts of perjury last month in testimony during the disgraced former president's civil fraud trial. Another guy taking the heat, going to jail for Donald Trump. Well, I guess he was loyal. Question for House Republicans couldn't be clearer now, folks. The top U.S. general overseeing military operations in Europe warned lawmakers yesterday that the war in Ukraine has reached a decisive moment, with Russia expected to hold a 10-to-1 advantage on artillery shells within weeks unless the United States approves additional military support for the government Kiev. Something has to be done, and a long time ago. We are losing, and that is bad and scary, and I've talked about it a lot here with several guests, and we'll continue to focus there because it is a very important story here on Earth One. Yesterday, President Biden called for 12 weeks of paid family or medical leave, large investments in preschool for 4-year-olds, and the extension of a tax credit to help working families and investments to give families access to higher quality childcare for $10 a day. How about that for another great thing the Biden administration is doing that won't get reported nearly enough? But their headline at the New York Times, Biden courts caregivers pledging to expand support if reelected. All right, a few more quick hits. Right-wing House Republicans blocked a bill to extend an expiring warrantless surveillance law after Trump opposed it. In the Middle East, an Israeli airstrike in the Gaza Strip killed 3 sons of the political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh. Intense storms brought flash flood and tornadoes to cities along the Gulf Coast. The U.S. Postal Service proposed raising the price of postage nearly 8%, the latest in a series of hikes over the past 3 years. And I thought this headline was funny. A worker was fired by a Munich, Germany museum for hanging one of his own paintings among its modern art collection. And I like that guy. I like him quite a bit. Aw, damn. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to pull any audio clips. I'm having a bit of a computer issue that seems technically unsolvable, and it's getting late, so I want to get this baby out to you and posted by midnight each and every day. Sorry about that. I'll fix it and get back to it tomorrow, I'm sure, but I'm very happy to bring you my conversation with Tim Wise, who is always, always awesome. You can find him, of course, at Tim Jacob Wise on Twitter, where he is still active. He's going to have some big career news pretty soon. I'm very excited about, it looks like, that we'll be able to share with you. Always love when he joins me. He's the author of 9 books, including his latest Dispatches from the Race War. He also wrote Dear White America, Letter to a New Minority, and Colorblind. His highly acclaimed memoir, White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son, is really, really good. He was named one of 25 visionaries who are changing the world. And he's contributed chapters or essays to over 25 additional books, and his writings are taught in colleges and universities across the nation. Of course, he speaks all over the country as well. You should book him. You should follow him. You should support him. Always happy that he joins the show on a regular basis. Many of you would love to see him in Vegas, so that's where we start. I told him about Pod Jam, and he said he'd like to come next time, which I'm looking forward to already. One of our country's leading anti-racist authors and educators right now, the great Tim Wise.
Thanks for having me back.
Your name came up a lot from listeners who I met at the Big Pod Jam. They said I could listen to that guy all day long, and they really appreciate all the appearances that you make here on the show. I can't tell you how much we all appreciate you.
Great, man. Well, I want to come. I'll come with you next year if you do it again. That'd be great.
Hopefully we will. You'll be the headliner. It'll be awesome.
Great.
We'll do keg stands. Is that something that you're interested in? Great.
Yeah, of course. At 55, why not? Why not?
All right, let's start here. DEI is very, very popular to talk about these days. More and more people hear the words. They still don't know what they mean. But basically, it would seem that no matter what happens, if you have an experience with a person of color, especially in the workplace, a professional experience, they are to blame because they only got that job because of DEI initiatives. And of course, with the changes on affirmative action, we used to think it was about college. It's now everywhere in almost every space as an excuse. So please pick it up there and tell me what the hell's going on and how do we feel about this? How do we handle this?
Yeah, I mean, this is quickly becoming the dominant narrative on places like Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it this week. And Elon Musk is perpetrating a lot of that. He continuously retweets people who are attacking any type of diversity or equity initiative at all, or as you mentioned, just anyone who has a story about I had bad customer service from a black person, or this one person tweeted out a thread the other day talking about I had some legal work that had to be done and the firm that I went to assigned me to an obvious DEI hire, which, they didn't look at the resume. They didn't look at anything but they had a bad experience. And therefore it had to be because this person had standards lowered for themselves. Now, here's the thing. We've all had shitty service or bad professional experiences with people who are white, with people who are male, right? With people who come from dominant social groups. What's the excuse then? I mean, what is the reason? Well, apparently when white men give us shitty service or fail us in some way or are mean or just incompetent, we're supposed to ascribe it to their individual lack of competence. But if it's someone black, well, it's clear, right, that they obviously lowered standards. There's a word for what you are when you make that assumption. And I think we all know what it is. That's just textbook racism, assuming that any negative experience with the racial other is about that person's race. Is a textbook form of racism. And so now it goes so, the door blows off the Boeing jet, the Alaska Airlines Boeing plane a couple of months ago, and literally the conversation on X being pushed by Elon, among others, was, well, this is what you get when you have a DEI program, because somebody, got on the Google machine and looked up and found out that Boeing has a DEI program for black pilots. Now, apparently, somebody forgot to explain to Elon Musk, who I thought was some kind of genius galaxy brain, that black pilots don't actually solder the doors to the plane. So if the door flew off the plane, that's a machinist union issue. And I've been to the machinist union at Boeing in Seattle. It's a lot of white dudes. It is not a whole hell of a lot of black and brown folks. So they need to talk to those people. But that happened. Then the bridge in Baltimore, right, collapses because it gets hit by a barge. And the first thing, and I said immediately, I wonder how long it's going to take for somebody to blame this on DEI. And I said it halfway tongue in cheek, but halfway knowing full well that shit would show up within a few hours. And sure enough, it did. They said it's the fault of Baltimore's DEI mayor. So apparently we are to believe that if the mayor were white, he would have used his special white man power brain cells to fortify the steel on the bridge to keep it from collapsing, because that's like a special power that white people have. But
the white mayor would have seen this potential for an accident.
Of course. I mean, that's the kind of lunacy. Anything that goes wrong, they want to ascribe to that, because the purpose of this, I mean, I'm making fun of it. We're joking about it, but the purpose is to create this sort of mimetic thing in our mind where whenever you hear anything bad, if your immediate sort of default is to think, well, it's black people or it's Latino immigrants or it's whatever. It's the racial other, the religious other, the gendered other, the sexual other. It's a way to scapegoat entire groups of people as a way to put the brakes on any attempt to create greater equity in this country. And this has all been happening since the 2020 uprising, right? Where you had all these right wingers very concerned about all these millions of people, including millions of young white people out in the streets demanding racial justice, talking about systemic racism, talking about inequity. And they realized if they didn't get control of the narrative, right, that they were going to lose a lot of their power and position to greater equalization. And how do you control the narrative? Well, you go out there and you do two things. Number one, you ban the teaching of systemic racism in schools. You ban discussions about systemic racism in schools, because if you can do that, then the youngins won't know there's anything to be upset about, right? So you can take away the material. They won't have the consciousness. And then you try to flip the script on who the victims are. So in other words, there's nothing to see here except white victimization, right? There's nothing to see here when it to anti-black racism. There's nothing to see here when it comes to anti-immigrant bigotry, but there's plenty to see here when it comes to why you didn't get the job. Well, it was obviously DEI. Why your kid didn't get into the college they wanted. Well, it's obviously DEI. Why your taxes are too high. Well, it's obviously because all that money is going to those black and brown people, which is a funny thing to say, because those are the same black and brown people who were being told are taking all the jobs. Now, I want someone to explain to me how you can both take all the jobs and at the same time take none of the damn jobs and live on welfare benefits for the rest of your life. Like, those two things don't tend to work together. If you're just laying back on public assistance, my guess is you didn't take any job, let alone all of them. Right. And if you took all of them, you certainly are not sitting around getting public assistance. I don't ask much of racist because I expect very little. The only thing I ask is I don't like my racists to be moving targets. I need them to pick a position, stick in a rhetorical lane, and not contradict. But that's what these folks do, because all they want to do is demonize, so as to convince white people that there's no injustice that we ought to be concerned about so far as those folks are concerned, but there's plenty of it aimed at us.
It's so horrific, because it's so exhausting for black folks who work so hard throughout their life to get to a certain spot. So it doesn't matter who it is. It could be the president of Harvard, DEI, it could be a ship captain or a pilot. All these people have overcome tremendous odds to get where they did almost all the time. And yet they are being told that they didn't work as hard. They aren't as talented. And I just can't imagine what that kind of indignity does day in and day out. And again, it's not to just blue collar folks or black folks without college degrees. It is elite, heavily degreed black folks as well. It doesn't matter who you are.
And all of that is happening, I beg to remind everyone, against a backdrop of intense white male mediocrity in this country.
Sure, yeah. Well,
as typified by the Trump family and the boys in that family, and really just white mediocrity because Ivanka's pretty mediocre.
Well,
I mean,
take a look at my career. I mean, you don't have to be nice. I'm right here.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's us too, right? I mean, yes, of course. But white male mediocrity is regularly rewarded. The Trumps are a perfect example of that. Jared Kushner is a perfect example of that. So with that being the backdrop, people like Claudine Gay are being attacked, supposedly for plagiarism, but it wasn't. I mean, even the people that she said that she was supposed to have plagiarized said they didn't think she was plagiarizing them. Right. Meanwhile, Bill Ackman, the hedge fund guy who was responsible for claiming the scalp of Claudine Gay, which is a term that Christopher Rufo actually used to describe what they did to her. It's not my term. It's his term. Bill Ackman's wife has committed plagiarism, documented plagiarism on occasion after occasion after occasion. But again, because she's white, right? Oh, well, no harm, no foul. They are going after specifically black scholars for supposedly, not being as honest and trustworthy. Chris Rufo has actually speculated that on his X account, that he thinks from the evidence he can see that perhaps, black scholars in the grievance studies departments are just more prone to plagiarism than others. Which is, again, that he's done no statistical analysis to suggest that. And it's racist as hell to even suggest it. But he doesn't care because he knows that whether it's true or not, that will be amplified by people like Elon Musk. It has been amplified by people like Elon Musk, along with the great replacement theory nonsense that Elon seems so stricken by, because you can take the boy out of apartheid, but you can't take the apartheid out of the boy. And so there we are. So DEI has now become public enemy number one. And again, those of us who do anti-racism work for years, we made fun of DEI for being pretty weak. Like it doesn't really historically hasn't really done a lot to shake up the power structure. It's been pretty weak tea. But the fact that we're having to defend even that now tells you how far back we've come. We're not talking about forward looking or particularly radical initiatives. We're talking about things like recruitment fairs, where you try to go into black communities and have a particularly targeted recruitment fair. Well, people will complain about that. In Alabama last year, the attorney general was getting calls and emails from white folks who were angry about Black History Month being critical race theory and anti-white. Like that's where we are. It's sort of this ridiculously silly season, which, we can make fun of, but at the end of the day, it's not funny because a lot of people's lives, opportunities, well-being are at risk. And now you've got the Congress just recently and all these right-wing groups talking about trying to eliminate DEI programs in med school training, right? They want to get rid of DEI in medical school training in spite of the fact that we have years of evidence of racialized inequities in healthcare, even for black and brown folks who are at the top of the income pyramid. In other words, affluent black folks have worse health than some of the poorest white folks because of the racially discriminatory provision of care. That has been documented in study after study after study for 20 years. So if we're going to get rid of DEI in medical school training programs, which is what the Congress is targeting now, what we're going to end up doing is leaving doctors and nurses and other medical professionals bereft of the tools and the analysis they need to know how to close those gaps, meaning literally people are going to die because of this obsession that right wingers have with getting rid of anything that talks about equity at all. That's what's at stake. This isn't just about history classes. It isn't just about rhetoric. It's about life and death.
Yeah, well said. And I know you generally like to target your criticism towards white folks, but I got to say, I'm talking to, speaking of scholars, people like Dr. Christina Greer at Fordham and Dr. Jason Johnson and other black scholars that join me here regularly that I've obviously learned so much from. And they've been highly critical of the well-known, influential black folks with platforms who have been very critical of DEI, similar to some of these white right-wingers. I'll name them. They generally don't. But we're talking about people like Killer Mike, this guy Charlemagne the God, and a guy who's probably not considered liberal, but this guy Coleman Hughes, who's been he's been everywhere. He's been on with Bill Maher. He's been on The View recently. He's been just about everywhere. So these are black folks aren't making the arguments that white folks have been making for a long time and just obviously updating them. And then they get so many invitations because they're black folks criticizing DEI and CRT and all these other anti-racist ideas, theories, and policies. What do you say about those guys and the problem that black folks like that present? And I know you like to focus on white folks, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, I would separate Killer Mike from Coleman and Charlemagne, because I think that not only I know Mike, and I think I know a little bit more about. Well,
he supported Brian Kemp over Stacey Abrams, is what a lot of black folks are mad about. That's the one thing.
I disagree with them about a lot of things, but I'm saying I think that Mike's politic is considerably deeper and more about fundamental systemic and structural change. Now, I don't necessarily agree about all the ways in which he would seek to get there, but Coleman Hughes is very clear. I mean, Coleman Hughes has written essentially and helped to propagate the lie that George Floyd wasn't murdered by Derek Chauvin. So he's written about that. This is somebody who platforms some of the most outrageous content, all while claiming there is no racism in the justice system or wherever else. And so I think that's different. Coleman Hughes is not looking to fundamentally transform the, let's say, political economic power structures of the country. Mike is. I mean, Mike's politics are about fundamentally, altering the power structure. It's one of the reasons he supported Bernie Sanders. Is one of the reasons he typically had believed in when it came to economic policy and other social policy, much more left-leaning things. Coleman Hughes doesn't believe in any of that. And Charlemagne, I don't sense any particular politic at all on his part. I mean, he platforms Candace Owens. I think he, is a cultural phenomenon within the country, not just in the black community. I mean, he's a huge name, but I don't sense that he has some long record of political activism and social activism that would make him progressive or on the left. What I think ties all three of them together, though, and not just the three of them, but others who are very clearly on the right, people like Candace Owens, people like Thomas Sowell, people like Walter Williams, people like Larry Elder, is that all of them can find, yes, some black and brown folks who will support what they're saying, but they can find a lot of white people who do. They can find a ton of white people who will absolutely salivate at the idea that they have found a black person who says some of the things that they think, because that becomes the get out of jail free card. That becomes, for white conservatives, that's their black friend. They don't know Charlemagne. They don't actually know Mike. They don't actually know Candace Owens, but they just think, gosh, it makes me feel so good that this black person is saying the same thing about black people that I think about black people. Right.
Exactly.
And so that's the thing that links them. And I think the problem is not that black folks have lots of different views about things. That's always been true. And they're all just as black as the other. I'm not one of those people that's going to, first of all, white people don't have the right to suggest that there's only one way to be black, but also just intellectually, there's not just one way to be black. It's fine that black folks have disagreements about those things. What concerns me is the way that white tastemakers, opinion makers, and elite media hype up those black folks who were seen as standing apart from the larger black community. So Coleman Hughes has been featured in the Washington Post and the New York Times. All these folks get huge media attention precisely because the media seems to think like, oh, this is different. This is a different view. But how often do they go and find, the white community apparently is incredibly reactionary. If you look at the polling, if you look at who white folks vote for, but they don't go do that. They don't, and I'm not asking for them to focus on me, but there are a lot of white folks that do anti-racism work. For instance, they're showing up for racial justice. There are 100 chapters of Surge around the country, 100 plus chapters of white solidarity, anti-racist allies working in solidarity with communities of color. How many feature stories have been done of that? That's actually an organization with 100 plus chapters, thousands of people involved in it. They're white. They clearly are different than the norm in the white community, right? But they're not getting puff pieces. They're not getting profiled in the Washington Post or New York Times. They're not getting invited to be on The View. They're not getting, nobody's talking about them, but Coleman Hughes is different than quote unquote most black people. And instead of asking why, why is that? Is Coleman Hughes just smarter than most black people? Is that what we're saying? Is it just black people as a group aren't real smart, but that guy figured it out? Larry Elder figured it out?
Right.
Like really? The guy that did Moral Court on television, he figured it out. That guy, so it's really sort of offensive. But what happens is those people end up they punch way above their weight, right? Candace Owens has nothing intellectual to say whatsoever.
Way above their weight. Yes. I've been on air with some of these people. I always said about a lot of these black conservatives, I'm like, listen, I'm nothing special, but I mean, you are, where did they find you? What are you? You're not able to really even make the point very well. I mean,
and I know people that have been in the studio with Larry Elder before, and when the mic is off or the cameras are off, he's just glad handing them an act and like it's all an act.
Oh, well, I've been there too.
Studio with him and have said at the end, and he's even said something to that effect. Like, this is just a shtick, right?
Newt Gingrich basically did that to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people do that to me. Like, he's like right before the mics went on, he's like, no matter what, let's not be boring. I was like, motherfucker, that's not the goal.
Right.
All right. So let me ask you specifically, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about anti-Semitism because it is back, baby. Hardcore. And, I was reading your Twitter feed and a lot of people talking about how it's being mainstreamed, and it's so shocking. It's so shocking, and it's obviously somewhat fascinating in what's happening with the Middle East if it weren't so horrific and shocking that people are just saying what they're saying in such an overt way in major media outlets. I mean, so talk to me about how you're seeing anti-Semitism being mainstreamed.
Well, I think first off, it's important to acknowledge that it never really, it never went away. I mean, it was always hanging around. It was
a little more subtle. I mean, there were people spray painting swastikas and committing hate crimes, but it was the things that you would say would just be like, he's a little bit of a, shyster.
Well,
like it was coded.
For instance, as your listeners know, I got my start doing anti-David Duke work. And back in those days, in 90 and 91, Duke had to really keep all the anti-Jewish stuff under wraps because people were telling him, his own people in Louisiana were telling him, listen, man, there's only like 14,000 Jews in the state. You got to stop talking about Jews. You got to talk about black people. That's what they want to hear about.
In the state? Were there 14,000 in the state of Louisiana?
14,000 in all of Louisiana. Okay. Yeah, something like that. And most of them were in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. But and he was being told like that nobody wants to hear about the Jews. You got to talk about black people. Now, David fundamentally is much more of an anti-Semite than just an old school anti-black racist because he views, and all Nazis and neo-Nazis do, they view Jews as the real problem who manipulate black folks, manipulate Latino immigrants, manipulate people of color to destroy white Aryan society. They fundamentally think the same thing Hitler believed. And that was in 1991. Now, what has changed is that absolutely you can run for office or you can be a influencer on social media. And now you don't have to speak in the same level of code. You still see some of the code. The George Soros code, the globalist language, which we know historically has been code for Jews. But nowadays you will see a lot more of it just on social media than you would have seen 5 years ago, than you would have seen 10 years ago. The thing I think is important to point out, though, is that contrary to what many are trying to argue, this is not an equal opportunity bigotry that's just as common on the left as it is the right. Are there people on the left who've said some really foul shit in the wake of October 7th? Of course. But the vast majority of the people that have been saying foul shit about Jews historically and still today in this country and around the world are clearly not on the left. They don't give two shits about the people of Palestine or of Gaza. Right. And their primary concern is attacking Jews as Jews. They're not interested in Middle East policy, except insofar as it allows them to bash Jews. People on the left who I know, although there are some clearly who have gone over from critiquing Israel or Zionism into critiquing Jews as Jews. The vast majority of people on the left who are calling for peace and justice in Palestine and in Gaza honestly do separate out the idea of Jews from the idea of Zionists. I'm an anti-Zionist Jew, and all the people I know who consider themselves such, our argument is Zionism is a bastardization of Judaism. It is not Judaism at all. It is actually a slap in the face to Judaism as a moral and ethical set of principles. But people on the right aren't attacking Israel, the nation state. They're not attacking even Zionism as a philosophical thing. They are posting memes and things about Jews as Jews with all the old stereotypes about controlling the money, controlling the media, all of those things. And people like Elon, once again, are retweeting signal boosting people like that and doing nothing to try to rein them in, all in the name of supposed free speech and letting people make up their own minds. But memes are not arguments, right? Tweets are not arguments. They're just sort of brain farts that people put on a page and then they get retweeted and reboosted over and over again. So I think it's happening. I think it's real. But I think it's very important that we stop this both sidesism, which suggests that it's equal left and right, or as some would have it, even worse of a problem on the left. No, it's not. It's absolutely not. If we understand anti-Semitism as hostility towards Jews as Jews, not Jews who cleave to a particular political philosophy, because that adds a category to it that takes it out of the realm of anti-Semitism. Not Jews who defend the actions of a particular nation state, because that adds a category to it. Anti-Semitism is hostility towards Jews because we are Jews. And this was always waiting to be resurrected and reanimated in this country, because keep in mind, we have a huge percentage of the people in the Republican Party and among American conservatism who are evangelical Christians. The core principle that they live by is this notion that unless you accept Jesus as your personal savior, you're going to hell. And they aim that at Jews specifically.
Right.
So if your party, if your movement is captured by a bunch of people who think Jews are spiritually deficient, that our souls are empty vessels, that we will burn in a lake of fire for all eternity unless we stop being Jews, you are the anti-Semite. You are the anti-Semite. You're the one whose entire theology is anti-Jewish bigotry. So we ought not be surprised that the right would resurrect anti-Semitism in these really blatant forms, because it's been there the whole time in their theological and eschatological positions about the end times and what's going to happen to me and mine when Jesus comes back. So to hell with them for complaining about anti-Semitism on the left, sort of fix your own house before you start casting around for other people.
Well done, as always. I just got to ask you, this is just mainly for me because it really shouldn't matter. I don't even know if you heard about it, but I'm going on Australian TV later on because I'm a big deal. And they want to ask about all the hard-hitting issues, specifically Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the actor and wrestler, coming out and saying last week, I think he was on Fox News, that, yes, he supported Biden last time, but he doesn't want to be divisive. He's not going to endorse anybody this time. And I just want to steal whatever he had. Did you know about this?
I mean, I heard that he said it. Yeah.
And so I just want to steal whatever you say, even if it's off the top of your head. It's going to be better than if I poured over it for hours. So go ahead and give me my lines.
I mean,
give me my lines.
I think it's pretty disingenuous to say that you don't want to be divisive making that comment on Fox. It's one thing, right? I mean, it's one thing if The Rock doesn't want to endorse, he didn't have to endorse last time. I don't think anybody was really waiting around with bated breath for what Dwayne Johnson was going to say we ought to do come election day. I'm not sure that was a huge endorsement that anybody even gave a shit about. But the fact that he now goes on Fox to say, I wish I hadn't done it, well, okay, you could have said that on your own social media feed. He could have put up an Instagram video and said, I'm just going to stay out of it this time because I know I've got fans, do the whole Michael Jordan Republicans buy shoes too bullshit, whatever. Like, you can do that. But when you go on Fox and say that, what his people hear, what Trump's people hear, what the Fox listeners hear is, oh, he's on our side. We've got The Rock on our side. I don't know what Dwayne Johnson's politics are. I really don't. I have no idea what they are, and I don't really particularly care. But the fact that you go on the most divisive network, a network that's entire brand has been about division and that has been responsible for so much of the division in the country politically, and say you're tired of being divisive is a little bit ridiculous. And so I think there are better ways if he wanted to stay out of it. Well, here's the thing. If you want to stay out of it, just stay out of it. Right? You don't have to say shit. Like, why do you have to announce, I'm not going to say anything? You just did. Like, if you're going to be quiet, be quiet. It's like people that are on Twitter and they get angry, like, I'm leaving Twitter. Just leave, Precious. Just go. Why are you telling everybody what you're going to do? Nobody cares. Get to stepping and don't let it hit you on the way out. Like who cares, Rock? Like, whatever. It just seems to me it was just an unfortunate place for him to make that announcement because it comes with all this extra baggage, I think.
I got to ask you about the throw up in the mouth moment of last week when the disgraced former president compared himself to Nelson Mandela. What did you think of that? You think that he can't shock you, and you wake up and it's like, no, I'm going to ignore him. He can't shock me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first off, look, if he really wants to do 27 years in prison, let's get going. Let's get this shit popping right now. Like, we could make this happen. You could go for 20. He's not going to live 27 years, but we could get a good little start on it. Now, maybe he could make it 27 years if old Doc Ronnie Jackson, who's now a congressman from Texas, but he was the White House doctor who said that Donald Trump, if he just would lay off the cheeseburgers, he could live to 200. Which anytime a doctor says that and doesn't get his medical license revoked immediately, there's a problem. But look, here's the good news. If Ronnie is correct, if Doc Ronnie, as Trump calls him, because that's what you call a doctor. Doc Ronnie. If Doc Ronnie was correct, 27 years, my God, Donald Trump would still be a middle-aged man when he comes out. So I think we need to get started on this Mandela thing. But he has to go to Robben Island prison. He can't just go to some cushy federal prison in the U.S. He's got to go to Robben Island, and he's got to be left with one book and a dim bulb for half of the time. And he has to be beaten by guards, because Mandela surely was, So we really need to, if we're going to do the analogy, we just really got to do it upright. And I, for one, am very appreciative that Donald Trump is willing to volunteer for such service. I think we should impress upon him the importance of getting started right away with that.
I'm all for it too.
Plead guilty. He wouldn't even have to go to courts. He'd be great. He could just plead guilty. We lock him up, and he starts the Mandela thing.
What do you think about his Truth Social network bombing?
Well, I think if you're stupid enough to invest in it, you deserve to be bankrupt.
Fair enough.
That's what I think. If you're going to put your money into that, a company that has a 1,500 to 1 price to cost ratio, whatever it's called, the amount of revenue that you're bringing in is so little compared to the value. $9 billion valuation for a company that's brought in, $40 million or a year is all they brought in revenues. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. I'm no stock expert. I'm no investment expert. I'm not Jim Cramer, which, Jim Cramer is not really Jim Cramer either. If you follow his advice.
Oh, I worked for him for years. Yeah. Oh
my God. His investment advice is shit. Like every study that's ever been done will show you that if you do what he tells you to do, you will lose money relative to just about anybody. You could sign up with a brokerage firm and have them manage your money. Yeah. But I'm not even as competent as that. And I know that anyone who invests in Truth Social is just asking to be bankrupted. So, let them have it. I mean, I don't think anyone with any sense is going to invest in it anyway. And the ones who are going to be his cultists. So
that's for sure. The guys who created it they've gotten indicted for like insider trading or some kind of financial.
Of course. It's just all a bunch of grifters. And the guy that put up the bond for Donald Trump, everybody he's in bed with.
He's a real dirtbag. Yeah. He made his money with
his billions selling subprime car loans to poor people. I mean, it's just like, the hits just keep on coming with this guy.
Speaking of the hits keep on coming, yesterday, Arizona's Supreme Court upheld a 123-year-old penal code provision that bans nearly all abortions except to save the life of the mother, which is nice of them. What are your thoughts on how these continued court decisions, state by state, affect the election? What do you make of the disgraced former president's announcement this week that he thinks it should be, as he said, decided at the states? And I think the big criticism about that, by the way, is that a lot of the media got that wrong, because, of course, that's not what's going to happen, given the Project 2025 ideas and given the fact that, there's a lot of other ways. He's trying to have it both ways. But what do you make of the abortion issue? What's the developments between Arizona, Trump's announcement, and the run-up to the election, and what this means?
Well, look, I think the bigger issue than what it means for the election
is what does it mean for women. Fair enough. Yeah.
What does it mean for the women of Arizona, which is, of course, horrific, as well as other states, and what it could mean to women all around the country, depending on the Mephiplestone decision that would restrict and potentially make impossible the most common form of abortion, which is now medical, as
and medicine.
Yeah, I mean, so there's that. It does seem as though the Supreme Court is leaning against banning the medication. But look, you have Congress that if the Republicans were to regain the Senate, and if they were to hold the House, and if Trump were to take back the White House, they have talked about, reviving the Comstock Act and using that to ban the use of the medicine through the mail, which the court would allow them to do. I mean, they're just saying right now under existing law, you couldn't do this. So that's scary. But I think the thing that I will say this. In a weird way, I have more respect for the anti-abortion folks who want a national ban than I do the folks who say, let's give it back to the states. I think they're all horrible, but I have more respect for the moral principle that they're arguing as ghastly as it is.
Of course, because it's consistent.
Right. If you actually believe that fetal life is morally equal to born life, then you don't let California keep killing babies. You don't let New York keep killing babies. Right. You gotta ban everywhere if that's what you mean. So if you're someone who says that you believe in it going to the states, what you're really telling me is that you don't actually believe that fetal life is equal to born life. The moral principle is out the door, and all you're left with is a states' rights principle, which is a totally different discussion, a totally different set of philosophical and legal premises. So I have more respect for the consistency, frankly, of the Mike Pences of the world and the people who, I mean, I find their views horrible and I disagree with them fundamentally, but I at least get where they're coming from. This idea of giving it back to the states is just them trying to, as you said, have it both ways. To preen as being pro-life and, oh my gosh, we're saving the babies, but at the same time knowing that politically that is a loser for millions of people around the country in a lot of states. And frankly, what they're starting to learn is that's a losing proposition even in some of those supposedly red states. Yeah. Because every time that we've seen since the Dobbs decision, we've seen over and over again in those states, in places like Kansas, in places where you wouldn't have expected it, you have seen that the turnout for Democrats has been higher. The pickups have been there. The momentum is there. So I think the Arizona court, by virtue of what they did, probably handed the Democrats a pretty big gift in the state of Arizona. I'd like to think that maybe the Supreme Court there is just so radical that they thought, we got to make sure Kari Lake doesn't win anything. The best way we can do that is to say this outrageous decision, which people will link in their mind with Kari Lake, and maybe she'll lose. But I doubt they're playing 5-dimensional chess like that. They're probably just assholes who don't really care about women's rights. But I hope that it will be a wake-up call in the midst of that decision. I hope it'll be a wake-up call to, and I think it will be, to folks in Arizona and around the country about what these folks actually believe. They are not trying to save babies. We know that here in Tennessee, where I live, the same people that are restricting abortion won't do anything to stop guns in schools that are killing our babies, and have here in Nashville just a year ago at the Covenant School. And in fact, they just passed a piece of legislation to let teachers carry guns. So they can't teach accurate history. They can't talk about sexuality. They can't talk about racism, but they can carry weapons. And we're supposed to believe they're pro-life. They're not pro-life. They're about controlling the reproduction of women. They're about restoring patriarchal hierarchy, male domination over women, controlling women, keeping them, quote unquote, in their place, which I suppose is barefoot and pregnant to a lot of these people. And that's what they believe in. They are fundamentally about controlling reproduction as a way to control women. And it's moments like this where you begin to see that that's what it is. Right. And so I hope that between the Arizona decision, the in vitro fertilization discussion, which I think has also woken a lot of people up to what the implications are of defining embryonic life or fetal life or early life in the test tube as a fully functional human being. I think we're starting to realize what the not only sort of the absurdity of it, but the implications of that. What does that mean? You got Charlie Kirk, at Turning Point USA, who a week ago or whatever said, we should prosecute people that get rid of their extra test tubes with IVF, and we should make them have to hold on to them forever because that's fully ensouled life. Like, this is the kind of reactionary, absurd kind of belief system that the right wing wants to impose upon America. And I just hope that America is paying attention to that.
Final thing I just wanted to ask you was if you've been paying attention, any reaction to, the women's basketball games and it's been some pretty positive, inspiring numbers in terms of viewers and attention that it's getting. There's obviously some controversies, not only around racial things, but the South Carolina coach said she was okay with trans players playing, and she's been beaten up pretty hard. There's obviously all kinds of racial under and overtones and gender stuff. And so I just thought I'd throw that out there to see if you've been paying attention, what your thoughts are.
Well, anyone who's going to question Coach Staley's commitment to women's sports clearly doesn't know her very well. So the idea that her support for trans women in women's sports is a slap at women's sports. This woman is a legend. She's a genius coach. She's 109-3 in the last 3 years or something like that. Jamel Hill had a piece talking about that. Here's this amazing coach, inarguably one of the greatest coaches in basketball history, men, women, or otherwise. And yet, after 3 years of this incredible record and this undefeated season, what are the big stories about? The big stories are about Caitlin Clark. Now, make no mistake, she is an amazing player. She is an amazing talent. And Dawn Staley said that. Everyone in the game says that. No one denies that. But how is it that a mostly black team coached by a black woman can have this kind of year, and the biggest story is about a white woman on the losing team? This happened last year, too, with the game against LSU. There's just sort of this fascination with Caitlin Clark, which I wish was just about her talent. I wish it were, because she's got a lot of talent, but I cannot help but believe that part of that is this sort of great white hopeism that we often do. That's not Caitlin Clark's fault, by the way, at all. And she was very classy last year after the LSU game, talking about that she didn't deserve all that attention. The winners deserve that attention. I mean, so it's not her, but it's what we do with white athletes, especially if they are successful in what we view as mostly black sports or black games, right? We do this in the NBA. We do this in the college game. We do this. Historically, we did it with boxing. I mean, there's there's always been this sort of tendency. And I just wish we would interrogate that a little bit, not to take away from the greatness of Caitlin Clark or any other white athlete in those sports, because they can be amazing athletes. But I just think there's a little bit of there's this like wistfulness that comes with that. And that these black ball players and this amazing coach are not getting the credit for what they did, because we're paying attention to what one player on the losing team did. And I think that that's unfortunate.
So well said. And really appreciate that one as well, because I know I didn't mention that. So, of course, you thought about it and seen it. And I got to let you go, but I appreciate everything you just talked to me about. As always, man, you're such a great person to talk to about everything, and such a great friend to me as well. I thank you. We thank you, Tim Wise.
All right, man. Take care.
Yeah, Tim Wise, everybody go check him out. Follow him on Twitter, wherever the hell it's called, and go get all of his books. And I'm very excited about his big news that hopefully he'll be able to speak publicly about. He's a good friend of me, good friend of the show, and I always love when you go on Twitter or in other social media and let him know. He and all the rest of the guests, make sure to review the show on Spotify and iTunes. And if you're not a subscriber here at the end, that would surprise me. But hey, maybe today's your day. Would love to see a subscription, new subscription come in, join our community, join the stand-up marketplace. There was a quirk with that. We're going to get that fixed. And I'll see you on the Discord platform anytime. You're never alone if you're a member of the stand-up community. We know that. And Jon Carroll sings all about it in this song. Take it away, brother.
When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. We got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. Well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up